Lesson 15 Opposition, Technique and Advanced King Play. Part 1, Opposition explained with basic king and pawn endings. Concepts, basic king and pawn play. The goal of every king and pawn ending, king on the 6th, pawn on the 5th. What is OP position? Defensive opposition and other king and pawn ending drawing methods. Step 1. The goal, king on the 6th, pawn on the 5th. Always wins the game. The goal position, king on the 6th, pawn on the 5th always wins the game. The most important thing about being a good endgame player in chess is to always have a goal or a long-term plan. When it comes to king and pawn endings, king on the 6th, pawn on the 5th is your ultimate goal because it is a winning position regardless of whose turn it is to move. A simple example has black to move. Here, black is in opposition, which means the king is being opposed and must move, thus giving white the winning square for the king. 1.kd8 allows 2.kf7, followed by 3.e6, 4.e7 and e8 equals queen. 1.kf8 allows 2.kd7 and the pawn goes marching on along the e file once again. Step 1. The goal continued. White wins even when black has the opposition. White wins, even with black controlling the opposition. With white to play, black controls the opposition. Though the position is slightly more complex, it is still a win. White must sidestep to either f6 or d6, and black will move directly in front of white, maintaining the opposition, therefore, preventing the white king from leading the way. Generally the king should lead the pawn, as will be explained in more detail later. However, that rule can be broken in this position. 1.kf6 kf8 to e6, ka3.e7 kd7 only move, as black is in zugzwang, and 4.kf7 followed by 5.e8 equals queen, win. The black king was squeezed out of e8 square via zugzwang. 1.kd6 was also winning via the same pattern of advancing the pawn, and finally 4.kd7. Copyright chesskit.com, page 1 of 13. Lesson 15. Step 2. The tool. Opposition is the tool used to reach your ultimate goal. White plays 1.k4, taking the opposition and forcing black to lose ground. The best study method to use when learning endgame patterns is to start with the most basic example or goal position and then move backwards in time in order to see how that position might actually be reached in a real game. Here we see opposition in action as the tool used to reach our goal position in step 1. After 1.k4, black is in opposition and must surrender territory. Black is in zugzwang because if the king could stay on the e file forever, white would have no way to advance the pawn or make progress. However, after the forced 1.kd6 or 1.kf6, white continues to kf5 k7 3.k5, regaining the opposition. This pattern repeats. Step 2. The tool continued. The king must lead his pawn until the right time. Black played 3.kf7, and white continues 4.kd6, gaining more ground. In keeping with our ultimate goal, the white king continues to make progress along the e file. White leads with the king and needs not use the pawn until the king has reached its goal square on e6. Please see drawing example 2 for details on the consequences of moving the pawn too early, returning the defensive opposition to black. After 4.kd6, we see the winning pattern in action. Suppose the enemy king along the e file, the same file as the pawn, and then take whichever square the black king gives up. After 4.kd6, black must once again move back to the all-important e file, 4.k8, and white reaches the goal square with 5.k6. Step 3. Finish the job. The pawn goes marching on. White now moves the pawn to e5, win. Once the white king has reached its goal square, the 6th rank on the same file as the pawn, the remaining moves are an obvious and easy matter of technique. The pawn will move from e to e5, achieving king on the 6th, pawn on the 5th, and the game is over. The 3-step approach provided in this lesson. 1. Recognize your goal position. 2. Use opposition as the tool to achieve your goal, leading the way with the king. 3. And finally, follow with the pawn to the finish line, is a winning technique/pattern that works with every pawn excluding the corner or rook pawn. See drawing example 3 for more information on why the rook pawn leads to a draw. Copyright chesskit.com, page 2 of 13. Lesson 15. Drawing example 1. The basic draw. Never lead with the pawn. Black's last move, K78, waiting to gain opposition. As mentioned in the second diagram of step 1, the king should always lead the pawn in this winning technique. As they marched up the board towards the ultimate goal of promotion, the basic pattern referenced in step 1 will not work if the roles of the king and pawn are reversed, i.e. pawn on the 6th, and king on the 5th. Example. After K8, white has 2 attempts at progress. Either choice will be met by the black king on the corresponding square part 2 and the game will end in a forced draw. After Kf6 Kf8. 2.kd6 met by 2.kd8 3.e7 plus any other white move allows 3.k7 and black simply repeats the pattern with ka next move 3. K8 and after for K6 any other move losses the pawn black is stalemated. Drawing example 2, defensive opposition continued. If black can force white's pawn to lead, the black king can hold a draw. Knowing that a defender can hold a draw by moving straight back from the pawn and waiting for opposition on the corresponding square. Drawing example 1, we now see the white king must lead his pawn. Because of this, white must also prevent defensive opposition that blocks the white king from doing so. This diagram highlights what would happen if black were to gain the opposition. Note that if it were white's turn, 1.kf6 wins easily according to the winning method used in steps 2 and 3. Black plays 1.k7, and after 2.kf5 kf7, 3.e5 only move that makes progress 3.k7. 4.e6 if 4.k4 then 4.k6 holds the opposition and 4.k8. Drawing example 3, the rook pawn drawn, the enemy king holds the corner, the king can't be forced away from the corner. Our final example of the basic king and pawn ending draws is the study of rook pawns. The ultimate goal position, king on the 6th, pawn on the 5th is ineffective when advancing the corner pawn because the enemy king, in this case black, is not forced to make a choice as he normally is when faced with the opposition. Here black can simply play 1.8, and there is no I-file for white. After 2.6 kh8 3.h6 kilograms 8 4.h7 plus kh8, white will stalemate black with 5.kh6 or surrender the pawn with any other king move. In order to win with a rook pawn, white must prevent the black king from ever reaching the corner. Copyright Chessgid.com, page 3 of 13. Lesson 15. Bonus position sidestepping the opposition, the walking the pawn dog wing technique. Sidestepping the pawn's file, in an attempt to avoid the tool used in step 2, does not help black's cause to draw the ending. White wins by leading and protecting the pawn as it moves up the board. Not discussing the diagrams of step 2 is what happens when the defending king chooses to sidestep the e-file, thus avoiding giving white direct opposition. Our current position could have occurred if black chose to kd5 instead of k7 in the first diagram of step 2. As long as white maintains to the rule of keeping the pawn behind the king mentioned in drawing example 1 and explained further in part 2, white should be able to advance the pawn alongside the king, up the e-file, eventually promoting. The white king leads the pawn, walking the pawn like a dog toward the promotion square e8. After 1.e4 plus kd6 to kf6. Not to e5 plus as after 2.k7. Black is again blocking the e-file and white will be forced to advance the pawn, eventually leading to the draw position discussed in drawing example 1 to kd7 3.e5. kd8, if 3.k8 then 4.k6 and we have reached king on the 6th, pawn on the 5th 4.kf7 kd7 5.e6 plus kd8 6.e7 plus kd7 7.e8 equals queen, win. Did you notice how the king used his clear path on the f-file to walk the pawn up the e-file? This is a key pattern. Copyright Chessgid.com, page 4 of 13. Lesson 15. Opposition, Technique and Advanced King Play. Part 2. Distant Opposition. Concepts, more king and pawn play. More examples of defensive opposition. Making waiting moves in king and pawn endings. What are corresponding squares? Distant opposition. Example 1. Maintaining enough distance to hold opposition, white must attempt to make progress with the king first, not the pawn. In our first example, the result is a draw with best play. regardless of whose turn it is to move. Though there exists 3 ranks 5th, 6th, and 7th between the white and black kings, black is already in control of the distant opposition. Black's move 1.kd8 maintains enough distance, and the king is prepared to meet both 2.kc5 and 2.kd5 with the opposition. See next diagram. 2.d5 would allow 2.kd7, and we are now on familiar territory where white's pawn has moved in front of the king. After 3.kc5 kc7 4.d6 plus kd7 5.kd5 and 5.kd8, where black is ready to meet white on either 6.k6 with 6.k8 or 6.kc6 with 6.kc8. Drawing distant opposition. Example 1, Part 2. Meeting on the corresponding square. Black must wait to gain the opposition after white's king advances. As mentioned in the first diagram, the black king is prepared to meet both 2.kc5 and 2.kd5 on the correct corresponding square. This will prevent white from ever gaining the opposition on the black king, therefore forcing white's pawn to lead the way, inevitably ending in a draw. 2.kc5 is met by 2.kc7, if then 3.kd5 kd7 4.k5 k7, etc. If 2.kd5 immediately, then 2.kd7 and black is maintaining the opposition with the white king. If then 3.k5 k7 4.d5 only other try kd7 5.d6 kd8. The defending king must always retreat straight back from the pawn, and once again, black is ready to meet 6.k6 with k8, and after 7.d7 plus kd8 8.kd6 stalemates the black king for a draw. Copyright Chesskit.com, page 5 of 13. Lesson 15. Distant opposition. Example 2, Part 1. Recognizing the corresponding square even at further distances, the white pawn should never lead. In this position, black is using the knowledge of corresponding squares to his/her advantage in order to maintain the distant opposition. Black found that the corresponding square to e3 is e7, and c3 is c7. This means that black will only move to one of these squares, after white has chosen the path and moved to the square first. With the last move, 1.kd7, black recognizes that even at these far distances, he can wait and maintain the opposition. 2.k3 is met by 2.k7, while 2.kc3 is met by 2.kc7. One example line is 2.k3 k7 3.k4 3.d4, then simply 3.kd6, and white has lost winning chances by advancing the pawn ahead 3.k6 4.kd4 kd6. Drawing distant opposition. Example 2, Part 2. Finding the corresponding square. Finding the corresponding square can help you draw a game. Our next position shows the white pawn on d3, yet the kings have changed position. Here we see that if white tries to make progress along the e-file, the king will eventually be met on e3 by the enemy king on the corresponding square e7. If 1.k to kf8 to k3 k7, and white is once again being held back by distant opposition. Unless a passed pawn can outrun the enemy king, which the d-pawn obviously cannot, here white must find a way to improve the king's position to lead his pawn to promotion. White must find and recognize what the opponent's corresponding squares are and avoid them. White will then have avoided distant opposition. Distant opposition. White wins by avoiding the corresponding square. Avoid the distant opposition and win the game. In many cases, the defending king will already be too close to the pawn for the following idea to be possible, as in example 2, Part 1, where the black king was already on the d-file, and therefore in the best position to wait and maintain the opposition. However, in this instance with the black king is a few files away, and so white has a small window to make the right choice and win the end game. 1.kd2, headed for the queen side where the enemy king cannot reach the corresponding square c7. After 1.kf7 to kc3 k6 or to k7 3.kc4 kd6 4.kd4, and the opposition is 1 for white. For kc6 5.k5 kd7 6.kd5 k7 7.kc6 k6 8.d4 k7 9.d5 kd8 10.kd6, easily winning. Copyright Chesskit.com, page 6 of 13. Lesson 15. Opposition, Technique and Advanced King Playing. Part 3. Irregular opposition. Concepts, more king and pawn play, with further examples of corresponding squares. What is irregular opposition? The famous king dance position. Introduction to advanced king and pawn handing ideas. Irregular opposition. The king makes progress without directly opposing the goal position. King on the 6th, pawn on the 5th can be reached here. The name of this technique is irregular, yet it is arguably the most practical, which means commonly reached method of opposition in king and pawn handings. Because most endgames will not reach positions where the kings line up directly, knowing how to make progress and outplay the enemy when their positions are irregular is key. Here white starts off with the move 1.kd6. And though the kings are not directly opposing each other on a rank or file, the black king is still in zugzwang and must move, giving up the e6 square. The game continues. 1.kf8 best to k6 kilograms 7.3.k7 kilograms 8.4.kf6 and 4.kh7. Because black must guard the g-pawn, the king is forced toward the edge. Irregular opposition. Example 1. Diagram to irregular opposition leads to direct opposition, winning the g6 pawn. White now makes the final obvious move, 5.kf7. Black is in opposition, forced to move to the h8 square, and the g-pawn falls. White has achieved king on the 6th, pawn on the 5th and is easily winning after 5.kh86.kxg6 kilograms 87.kh6kh8a.g6 kilograms 89.g7 kf7 10.kh7 and 11.g8 equals queen. White's ability to make progress, despite never directly opposing the enemy king, was based on the fact that black had to guard certain key squares like e6, f6, and eventually the pawn on g6. Because black's king was tied down to those squares, white was able to move around the king, forcing black to lose ground and allow white's king to make progress towards that precious pawn on g6. Copyright Chesskit.com, page 7 of 13. Lesson 15. Famous irregular opposition example, the king dance. Diagram 1. Whomever moves first wins in this famous king dance position. This position brings together all the ideas of basic, distant with the kings being 3 files apart and irregular opposition. Even if this position never occurs in your own game, the concept is very important and extremely useful. Here the squares e3 and g4 are corresponding squares, commonly referred to as don't touch me first squares. This means that whoever moves to the e3 black or g4 white first will lose after the enemy immediately moves to the corresponding square. Example 1.k3 is met by 2 4, guarding the f3 pawn and placing the black king in zugzwang. The f4 pawn falls. On the other hand, 1.4 by white is met by 1.k3, returning the favor and winning. Famous irregular opposition example, the king dance. Diagram 2. White is forced to g4 and black delivers the final blow, 3.k3, win. The question then becomes, who can't force their opponent to the don't touch me square first, and how? Both sides must strive to reach the square that attacks the enemy pawn but isn't a don't touch me square. The most obvious squares are g5 for white and e2 for black. Typically, the more active king, so in this case, the king who moves first, will win the king dance by reaching the key square first. Assuming it is black to play, 1.kd3 is the correct move. White is now forced to dance away from the g4 square as 1.4 obviously losses immediately to 2.k3. 2.kh4 is the only move 2.2 would allow 2.k3 easily winning the f3 pawn and the game, and after 2.k2, white must play 3.4, and black retreats with 3.k3, win. Irregular opposition still works, but fails because of the rook pawn corner after obvious moves. The above position is drawn. Also important are cases when using irregular opposition is effective in making progress and forcing the enemy king to lose ground, but nonetheless leads to drawn positions due to other important factors in the position. For example, here white has a rook pawn. After 1.k7, white forces the black king to lose ground, surrendering the f6 square. After 1.8 to kf6 kh7 3.kf7 kh8 4.6 kilograms 8 5.kxh6, White has used the irregular opposition technique successfully. However, the end game is still a draw after 5. Kh8, as White is left with a rook pawn, and the Black King will easily hold the corner. Copyright Chesskit.com, page 8 of 13. Lesson 15, Opposition, Technique and Advanced King Play. Instructor's Guide. The importance of understanding king and pawn endings, from the most basic examples of king on the 6th, pawn on the 5th to the advanced positions of distant and irregular opposition, should never be underestimated. Players who skip these important steps will find themselves ill-equipped when trying to solve and play more complicated endgames with minor pieces and rooks. Essentially, a chess player's ability to make the right decision in many other types of endgames is based on their king and pawn ending knowledge. This is because all pieces besides the king can be lost or exchanged for one another. Therefore, there is always the potential for a king and pawn ending to occur in a game. The only way for a beginning chess player, especially a child, to master king and pawn endings is deliberate and repeated practice of the basics, as well as experience in solving the more complex examples. Because there truly is no easy transition from the basic concepts of opposition to the more advanced, make sure your students genuinely understand all the fundamentals of Part 1 before moving on to the distant Part 2 and eventually the regular Part 3 examples of opposition and advanced king play. Use the worksheets for practice during this process. Practical notes and advice. Lesson 15. Have your students practice the 3-step pattern explained in Part 1, trying the pawn on different files so that the child can realize for him/herself that this technique, culminating in king on the 6th, pawn on the 5th, works with every pawn except the rook pawn. Let them try on their own, offering very little feedback at first. They will often make the mistake of advancing the pawn too early, either allowing the enemy king to take defensive opposition, or advancing the pawn in front of their king, thus allowing the drawing methods explained in Parts 1 and 2 to occur. Let them learn from experience that advancing the pawn carelessly, neglecting their ultimate goal position, doesn't work. Then remind them of the winning technique, asking them to try and keep to the rule/principles. The defender should eventually try moving to the side file. See the bonus position of Part 1. Copyright Chesskit.com, page 9 of 13. Lesson 15. Lesson 15. King and pawn endings in the following diagrams. Black is drawing with defensive opposition only if the Black King is placed on the right square S. Draw a star on the square S that would give a draw to Black regardless of whose turn it is to move. If there is no way to draw, circle the White King. Are there any drawing squares for the Black King regardless of whose turn it is? Are there any drawing squares for the Black King regardless of whose turn it is? Are there any drawing squares for the Black King regardless of whose turn it is? Are there any drawing squares for the Black King regardless of whose turn it is? Copyright Chesskit.com, page 10 of 13. Lesson 15. Lesson 15. King and pawn endings in the following diagrams. Black is drawing with defensive opposition only if the Black King is placed on the right square S. Draw a star on the square S that would give a draw to Black regardless of whose turn it is to move. If there is no way to draw, circle the White King. Are there any drawing squares for the Black King regardless of whose turn it is? Are there any drawing squares for the Black King regardless of whose turn it is? Are there any drawing squares for the Black King regardless of whose turn it is? Are there any drawing squares for the Black King regardless of whose turn it is? Copyright Chesskit.com, page 11 of 13. Lesson 15. Opposition, Technique and Advanced King Play. Answer key. Worksheet page. King and pawn endings. Diagram number 1. Circle the White King. White has achieved king on the 6th, pawn on the 5th and is winning regardless of the position of the Black King or whose turn it is to move. Diagram number 2. Stars on A8, B8, C8, C7 and C6. 4 squares total. Obviously A8 and B8 hold the corner, but Black can also trap the White King to the rook file from the C file. For example, if the Black King was to start on C6, 1. Ka7 Kc7 2. K6 Kc8 3. Ka8 if 3 kilobytes 6 then 3. Kilobytes 8 3 Kc7 4. K7 Kc8 stalemates White in the corner. Diagram number 3. Stars on E6, D6, E8 and E8. 4 squares total. e6 and d6 obviously maintain a direct opposition on the white king and force the e5 pawn to lead the way, therefore drawing. e8 and d8 hold the distant opposition and prepare to meet any advance of the king. f5, e5, or d5 with direct opposition. Note, c7, d7, d7 and h7 would draw if black were to move, but if it were white's turn to move, the white king can gain the opposition by coming forward to the correct corresponding square. c8 and f8 would also draw on black's turn by waiting for the opposition on the correct corresponding square, either d8 or e8 respectively. Diagram number 4. Circle the white king, though there are several squares that might draw if it were black to move, and maybe even a few that would draw on white to move. There are no squares that draw regardless of whose turn it is to move. Diagram number 5. Stars on g6, h6, g8 and h8. 4 squares total. g6 and h6 obviously maintain a direct opposition on the white king and force the g5 pawn to lead the way, therefore drawing. g8 and h8 hold the distant opposition and prepare to meet any advance of the king. g5 or h5 with direct opposition. Note, f7, g7 and h7 would draw if black were to move, but if it were white's turn to move, the white king can gain the opposition by coming forward to the correct corresponding square. f8 would also draw on black's turn by waiting for the opposition on g8. Diagram number 6. Circle the white king. Diagram number 7. Circle the white king. Diagram number 8. Every safe square along the B, C and D files would lead to a forced draw regardless of whose turn it is to play. This position is designed to show the severe. Copyright Chesskit.com, page 12 of 13. Lesson 15. Disability of having the pawn in front of the king when trying to win king and pawn endings. Even on d8 and b8, the black king can wait to meet both 1.kd3 or 1.kilobytes3 with 1.kc7. And black is ready to meet any advance by the white king with opposition. There exists a total of 13 forced drawing squares: c4, b5, c5, d5, b6, c6, d6, b7, c7, d7, b8, c8 and d8. Copyright Chesskit.com, page 13 of 13.